Biden can present in a way that is more clearly responsive to Black Lives Matter, and if he can present in a way that he is truly the White House's guy, that he is really the person who is kind of...
He's Obama's guy.
He is the third Obama term. I do think that there are... And he has really... Almost not as good as President Clinton, but almost as good in terms of his capacity to do the kind of fluidity of cultural discourse with Black community.
All right, folks, joining us now is Michael Barone, senior political analyst at the Washington Examiner, author of Shaping Our Nation. And Michael, good to talk to you again, sir.
Hey, good to be with you, Steve.
Well, good. You know, first of all, this is a whole different thing. I don't want to digress, but when I hear that Joe Biden has this appeal to blacks, it can only happen with a media that ignores that he called Barack Obama the first clean, articulate black person to run for president, ignores the fact that he said education is better in Iowa because there are less minorities there than in Washington, D.C., and ignores the 7-Eleven comments. But any Republican who said those things would be toast. But that aside, I'm glad I didn't bring it up. Let's talk about two great pieces you wrote, and one is that Hillary Clinton might stop being the front runner. This one was two impossible things that could happen here in 2016. One involves Hillary.
Well, I was inspired, of course, by the Red Queen in Alice in Wonderland. When the Alice says one cannot believe in impossible things, the Queen says, well, I certainly can. In fact, I often believe 6 impossible things before breakfast. I only tried to imagine 2 or 3 impossible things happening in the 2016 presidential cycle. But one of them in my column in the Washington Examiner was, should black votes suddenly switch away from Hillary Clinton and toward another candidate, presumably in this case Joe Biden? And I noted that, you know, if you look throughout American political history, black voters have tended to vote overwhelmingly for one candidate or another, not just in general elections, where they were hugely Republican for 70 years after the Civil War and then have been hugely Democratic since 1964, but also in Democratic primaries, and even against candidates who have a legitimate claim on issues of particular importance to black voters. Going back, they supported Robert Kennedy by huge margins over Hubert Humphrey, despite Humphrey's strong civil rights record. And then 40 years later, in 2008, they supported Barack Obama in overwhelming numbers over Hillary Clinton, the wife of the man who was styled by some people as the first black president.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it'd be very interesting to see what happens if Biden does get in. The other impossible thing involves Donald Trump.
Well, the other impossible thing is that Donald Trump seems to be doing what more conventional Republican candidates have tried somewhat to do but have not succeeded in doing, which is to vastly increase the size of the Republican electorate. Go back to 2008 when both parties had open races for presidential nomination. You had 37 million voting in Democratic primaries and caucuses, only 21 million in Republican primaries and caucuses. And clearly Trump has increased interest in the Republican primary. We saw that 24 million people tuned in to that August 6th Republican debate. And it may not just be only Trump. You had something like 6 million tuning into the non-primetime debate at 5 p.m.
Right.
Eastern, it's 2 p.m. Pacific. That's bigger than any previous Republican presidential debate audience.
Well, that all plays into your other piece, which we have a couple of minutes left to talk about. Another impossible thing may happen, and that's a change in partisan alignment. There are certain things we've come to expect, certain states going a certain way, and that can change. But you talk about the fact that with what's going on now, with the landscape being what it is, these things could change.
Well, we know from history that things stay the same until they change, and political alignments seem to exist in very clear ways. You go back and you see that Jimmy Carter's 50% of the vote in 1976 resembles very much John Kennedy's 50% 16 years before in 1960, despite a whole lot of intervening activities. But in the 1980s, those alignments changed, and the South, which had once been solidly Democratic, becomes Republican, and presidentially in 1984, congressionally in 1994. And we see northern suburbs, which had been pretty solidly Republican in many cases, in the largest metro areas, moving towards the Democrats in the 1990s. And that, roughly speaking, has given us the political alignments today that we take as eternal. And they certainly have prevailed since the middle 90s for about 20 years. But when you've got people like Trump shaking up the political parallel, the political attitudes,
right,
and issues and things, I think that there's the possibility of that changing.
Well, we will wait and we will see. And Michael Barone will read you in the Washington Examiner. Thank you, my friend.
Okie doke. Good to be with you, Steve.
Take care. Give Me 5 is next, folks. Don't go away.